Hey guys, my name is Thomas. I want to talk to you a little bit about Easter. What's the Easter story? And about stories in general. My friend and I, we went out on the street just around town here and we were talking to people about Easter and asking them, hey, do you know the Easter story? And I was surprised how many people do not know what the Easter story is all about. And it's probably confusing, right? I mean, there's like bunnies and there's eggs and all this stuff like that. And so, do bunnies lay eggs, by the way? Because I've never seen it. But all this to say, just got me thinking, I just really wanted to share with you guys what Easter is all about. And so just thinking first a little bit about stories. We love stories. Everybody loves stories. Especially those stories that have a happy ending. And when it comes to stories, there's usually two kinds of stories. Well, there's fiction stories and there's nonfiction stories. When we think about fiction stories, what do we think about? Well, things that didn't really happen, right? Someone made it up. That might be a really cool story, but it originated in the mind of an author somewhere, and someone laid out that storyline, and they put the characters in there and all these things. So it didn't actually take place in history. However, nonfiction stories, those are things that actually took place in history. They have a really neat storyline a lot of times. There may even be a villain involved in a rescue, and then there's a happy ending, but they're things that took place with real people, real characters in history. And just a couple of examples. Let's think about a fiction story here. Well, how about the Three Little Pigs? The Three Little Pigs, the big bad wolf comes up and he blows one of the house down. The pigs go over to the next house, this, that, and the other. Well, we can put that in a fiction category pretty easily, right? I mean, I've never seen any pigs talking. I've never seen a big bad wolf that had such strong, dirty breath he could blow over a house, right? So put that in a fiction category. However, a nonfiction story may be the story of Anne Frank, right? This is something that really took place in history. But what about those stories that seem to, mix these two categories? They have what appears to be some like fictional elements, and then there's this non-fictional element too, where it's almost claiming to be non-fiction, but having a little fiction elements to it. When it comes to the Easter story, a lot of people put the Easter story into the fiction category. They'd say, that's a fable. That didn't really take place in history because someone rises from the dead. And just as, some people have never seen, right, a pig's talk or like a big bad wolf, then they say, well, I've never seen anybody rise from the dead. Therefore, the story of Easter has to be a fable. It has to be fiction. But then there's others who have studied archaeology and they study Christianity and Christian history, and they would say, oh no, it is actually historical. It is nonfiction. But they may go to the extreme of so much so that they would say, yeah, there was a historical Jesus. Yes, he lived in Israel and he was walking around and all this. But the fact that he said he rose from the dead, well, that couldn't have happened because that's just not possible. But when we look in the Bible, when it talks about the story of Easter, it actually combines these two elements. Yes, it is absolutely, from a Bible perspective, nonfiction, the story of Easter. But it seems to have some of those fictional elements. But the Bible never says that those fictional elements are actually fiction at all. It's still claiming they're nonfiction, that someone really did rise from the dead. And so keep that in perspective as we kind of think about and talk about the story of Easter. And I'm just going to give you a big overview leading up to Easter. I'm hoping to produce some more videos on the actual details of what led up to Easter in Jesus' life and ministry. But for now, we're going to get the backdrop of the story. So let's just look at the backdrop here. The story of Easter, you could say, starts with the creation of the world. God created the world. He created it good. He created it upright. He created people good to reflect his image. People are creative just like God is creative. And yet something bad happened pretty early on. And when you look in the book of Genesis chapter 3, something bad called sin. And sin distorted God's good creation. It distorted the hearts of people. And when we go from the story of creation through the rest of the Bible, sin is now and evil are now intertwined with God's goodness. God's goodness didn't stop. It's still on earth. People still reflect his image. And yet now we have intertwining of evil and good on earth. And when we look at the effects of sin, it's easy to see. Like, sin is everywhere, right? It's ravaged our world. It's ravaged the way things are. It's ravaged human hearts. It's ravaged marriages and all these types of things. And even early on, you can see that in Adam and Eve's children's life. They were murdering each other, and there was all kinds of bad things happening. So much so that God wanted to wipe out humanity at one point, believe it or not. Find that in Genesis chapter 6, verse 6. And so he actually sent a worldwide flood to flood out and to destroy all of humanity because they continually desired those things that are evil. But God, in his love and his mercy, he said, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to save the family of Noah. So he set his love on Noah. He decided to recreate, in a way, humanity in his likeness, in goodness. And so Noah was saved. They built an ark. But, it wasn't long after they got off the ark before even Noah himself and his lineage continued to intertwine evil with good. And so here's the storyline of the Bible, that God's goodness is being marred continually by people. Sin is distorting things. And God's like, I have got to fix this problem. I am going to rescue my people. And I have these external commands, but I need to put a desire within the hearts of my people to love me and to want to obey me and to want to love me as their king. And so what he decides to do is he says, I'm going to send my own son into the world so that he can cause people to be born again, to be birthed from the inside out, and to be recreated. And I'm going to have to send my son on a rescue mission to save my people from their sin. And so that's what he did. Jesus comes into the earth. He lives a perfect life. He does what Adam fails to do. He obeys his father. But something had to be done about sin. It had to be paid for. God is a good judge. He can't just forget about sin or put it under the rug. I think in Islam, they say that, God can just forgive sin. But in the Christian story of Easter, no, that can't happen. You can't just forgive somebody and just forget that all these bad things happen. Those things have to be paid for. That's called justice. And so Jesus, in love, in order to forgive humanity, says, you know what? I'm going to suffer and I'm going to die. I'm going to lay my life down for humanity so that God's anger can be poured out on me instead of them, and therefore justice can be upheld. And so Good Friday, the Friday before Easter, that's what it's all about. Jesus there suffering, dying on the cross because he is bearing God's holy anger towards humanity's sin, and he's doing it all in love. And everything you read in the Easter story about the crown of thorns on his head, him suffering, him dying, that is in love. And so Jesus died. And what does the Bible story say about Easter? It says 3 days later, early on Sunday morning, Jesus didn't stay dead. He rose from the dead. And that's what Easter is all about. It's about his resurrection. That Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me will never die. And he asked this question. He says, do you believe this? And so I'm going to leave you with that question. Do you want God's goodness to be restored in you? Do you want your heart to crave God? Do you want the power of sin to be defeated, for Satan to be defeated in your life? Then now is the time. This Easter is the time to turn away from following yourself. Turn away from following all these things the world says is important, and look to the Lord Jesus Christ and put your hope in him and follow him this Easter. And he will cause you to rise up with him and from the deadness of sin and give you new life and recreate you in his likeness to follow his commandments. Hey, you can read more about the Easter story, into the book of Mark in the New Testament, or any of the 4 Gospels. I look forward to talking to you soon.